One of the most common questions that we get in the gym is, what type of sneakers should I buy to train in? And of course, if you're not in our gym and you're training in a different gym, your sneaker choice will be dependent a lot on what you're doing. So if you are powerlifting, you'll need different sneakers than if you're weightlifting, than if you're doing CrossFit, than if you're doing running. There are two main features in shoes that we're going to talk about, and your training will tell you which of these features you need and which ones will benefit you in your own training. And will extend also to, sneakers that you might wear, outside of the gym as well, not just when you're exercising. And at the end of the video, we'll tell you what we generally wear in here and what our recommendations are. So the two main features that you're going to see in sneakers, the first one is the amount of cushion that you have. When you have a sneaker that doesn't have a lot of cushion, it doesn't absorb a lot of force. It really allows you to feel the floor underneath you. What it does do, though, is it allows for a much smoother and more complete production of force, which is really important if you're strength training or you're doing anything that involves strength. The opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to cushion are shoes that are really heavily cushioned. What you'll typically see here, you'll typically see these on someone that's doing marathons or ultra marathons. And so the reason why you might choose one or the other, when we're strength training, we want to produce as much force as possible. And that means we don't want the cushion in our sole of our sneaker to be absorbing force from us. Not only that, but the more heavily cushioned your sneakers are, the more the degree of freedom matters when it comes to foot movement. So if your foot moves a little bit on a very thin sole, it's not going to change your foot position much. But if your foot moves a little bit on a very heavily cushioned sole and you have a lot of weight in your hands, then what might happen is your degree of freedom will matter in the sense that you're going to sink into that shoe more, and it might actually throw you a little off center or off balance, and it might put your foot in a position that you don't necessarily want it to be in. So when it comes to strength training, the better choice is to have a shoe that has less cushion. Now, there may be times if you're doing some sprinting or you're doing some jumping where some amount of cushion actually makes sense. But if we're just strength training and we're not doing a lot of those high impact activities, something with less cushion makes more sense. Again, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're doing something like a marathon or ultra marathon, all that cushion helps to absorb force. When we're running long distances like that, the purpose of that event is to test our cardiovascular system. And one of the things that thick sole allows us to do is absorb some of the force so that our lower body doesn't have to work so hard to absorb the force itself. The second thing is the support that exists in the shoe. Support, what you'll typically see is, inserts or shoes that are built to prevent you from pronating, underpronating, overpronating. It's basically meant to keep your foot neutral. Going back to the example of a marathon runner, ultra marathon runner, if someone is running long distances, we don't want our ability to keep our foot neutral to be the limiting factor. We want to be testing our cardiovascular system. And truth be told, when it comes to neutrality in the foot, most of the actions that happen in our foot are far more influenced by things like our core and our hips, right? So the more center muscles and joints of our body, those are going to be more influential when it comes to things like pronation. And so again, if we're running really long distances for multiple hours at a time, it might make sense to have a shoe that is more supported, because then we don't need our musculature to work quite as hard while we're pushing our cardiovascular system. When it comes to strength training, our feet often end up in different positions. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to test the musculature and build the musculature, not just of our feet, but all the way up our leg and through our core. And so what that means is we don't necessarily want a shoe that's supported when we're strength training, because it takes some of the work out of it for us. Imagine you were wearing a back brace and you wore a back brace all day long and you did it for weeks or months at a time. At some point, the muscles of your core are going to start to weaken, atrophy in response to the fact that you're braced by this external object. And so that's sort of what happens when we wear shoes that are supported all the time, is the muscles, not just of our feet, but also of our hips and our core, start to get weaker in response. They start to atrophy, and they don't do their job as well when we go to a shoe that is unsupported. We could also talk about this in terms of everyday shoes. So if you're just walking around casually, you probably don't need as much support as you think you do. If you are having problems with your feet, it might be more worth it to explore strengthening muscles of the lower body and the core and the hip. It is, of course, individual, so people can make their own individual choices about whether they want to, how much support they want to wear in a shoe. But a lot of times, strength training is something we should at least be doing side by side with that shoe support in an effort to strengthen the muscles that need to be strengthened. Maybe so that someday we don't have to wear as much support in a shoe. Another example from real life would be if you were going on vacation and you were going to do a lot more walking than you're used to, and you don't want to be limited necessarily by the way that your feet or the strength of your feet or the muscles of your lower body and core. Maybe getting something supported for that instance makes a lot of sense. But when we're just in the gym, it actually probably doesn't make that much sense. One of the big things with supported shoes is it prevents our foot from moving naturally. Our foot is not meant to stay in sort of this neutral position all the time. It's meant to work sort of like a jellyfish where it flattens out and then it responds and pulls back up. And so when we wear shoes that are supported, we don't allow our foot to move naturally. And again, going back to that back brace example, if we're constantly structuring our body with this external object, the muscles that are meant to do that work will become weaker and they will atrophy. So what do we recommend in here? One of the big things with shoes, one of the big factors with sneakers, sneakers can be so expensive. Unless you're going to something like a bargain store where you're just pulling something random off the rack, and that might not even be advisable if you're looking for something with structure or cushion, because you really probably want to go somewhere where you can talk to a sales associate or somebody that might know the shoes a little bit better. If you're looking for something specific, it's probably unlikely that you'll find it in a bargain store. Shoes can be very, very expensive when you buy them brand new from a manufacturer. They can $100, $150, or even more. And so when people come to us and they ask, what kind of shoes should I buy? That's a big factor in our answer, is we don't want people spending crazy money on shoes that they maybe don't need. So I'll tell you the two brands that we wear a lot, and I'll tell you why. The two brands that we wear in here a lot are Vans and Converse, because they have thin soles without cushion. They have fairly good structure to the shoes themselves, so you don't want to wear like flip-flops in the gym, right? So having a shoe with a little bit of structure to it helps. But they have a thin sole. It allows your foot to move more naturally. It allows us to produce good force while we're in the gym. And when we're in the gym working out, we're not doing a whole lot of long distance running. And we're not doing a whole lot of jumping or sprinting in here as well. So having the shoe with just a little bit of cushion, not too much, a mostly flat sole, and something that doesn't have support in it makes a lot more sense. Plus, shoes like this are a lot less expensive, and that's a really important factor as well. If we were running, we would of course go and buy running shoes, something that has at least more cushion, maybe some support in it. And again, there are different situations. Every situation is a little bit individual, so different people might choose different shoes for when they're walking around versus if they're going on a longer vacation. And it just really depends on your personal preference. But again, if you're looking for shoes that are just basic sneakers for weightlifting, you could find yourself a good pair of shoes for a lot less money than what most athletic shoes go for these days. Like I said, we use Vans and Converse in here. Other brands that are a little more expensive, but that I've worn in the past have been Noble or New Balance, where again, we have a flat sole, not much support, not much cushion. It allows for all the force production that we're looking for when we strength train, and it allows our foot to move naturally so that we can continue to build the strength and resilience of our feet and our lower body and our core.